Sarah hesitated at the automatic doors of the emergency room, the fluorescent lights reflecting harshly off the purple and yellow blossoming across her skin. Each throb of pain was a fresh wave of doubt. Was this the right decision? Could she even go through with it? The Bruises, a brutal mosaic of Mark's anger, told a story she couldn't voice, a story of escalating tension, twisted words, and finally, violence. The pain was significant. A cracked rib, a throbbing jaw, and countless contusions that screamed with every movement. She'd tried ice, over-the-counter pain relievers, anything to avoid this. But the dizziness had started that morning, a persistent hum in her ears that threatened to pull her under. Her best friend, Emily, had practically dragged her to the car, insisting she needed a doctor. But the thought of explaining, of reliving the horror, was almost unbearable. The shame gnawed at her, a constant whisper telling her she was weak, foolish, deserving of the pain. Still, Emily's words echoed in her mind. You have to, Sarah, for yourself, for your future. With a deep breath, she pushed through the doors, steeling herself for the ordeal ahead. The cool air of the ER washed over her, a stark contrast to the burning shame that consumed her. The sliding doors hissed shut behind her, the sound echoing the finality of her decision. Now she was here, trapped in a sterile environment that felt both safe and terrifying. Each step further into the waiting room felt like wading through treacle, her legs heavy with dread. The internal battle raged on. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to run back to the false safety of her apartment, to endure the pain in silence. But she knew, deep down, that silence had nearly killed her. Mark's control had tightened like a noose, each act of violence chipping away at her spirit, isolating her from the world. She clutched her purse tightly, her knuckles white. Inside was her phone, her lifeline to Emily, and a fragile hope for escape. But what if Mark found out? What if he came looking for her here? Possibilities swirled in her mind, each one more terrifying than the last. She imagined his anger, his accusations, his manipulative words twisting the situation, making her the villain. Taking a seat in the crowded waiting room, she tried to make herself invisible. She avoided eye contact, focusing on the chipped paint on the opposite wall, willing herself to remain calm. The fear was a living thing, coiling in her stomach, threatening to choke her. She was vulnerable, exposed, and utterly alone. The waiting room was a symphony of suffering. A child shrieked, a man coughed incessantly, and the television blared a mindless daytime talk show. The air hung thick with the scent of antiseptic and anxiety. Each sound amplified Sarah's own internal turmoil, that a constant stream of people flowed in and out. Nurses hurried past, their faces etched with fatigue. Paramedics wheeled in gurneys bearing silent, still forms, and families huddled together, whispering worriedly. The sheer volume of human misery was overwhelming, making Sarah feel even smaller and more insignificant. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting long, distorted shadows across the room, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. Time seemed to stretch and compress, each minute an eternity. She watched the clock on the wall, its second hand ticking with agonizing slowness. The noise, the lights, the constant movement. It was all a sensory assault, exacerbating her already heightened state of anxiety. She felt like she was trapped in a pressure cooker, the tension building with each passing moment. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the chaos, but the images of Mark's face, contorted with rage, flashed behind her eyelids. Even here, surrounded by strangers, she couldn't escape him. The ER, meant to be a place of healing, felt like another prison. A voice called out, "Sarah Miller?" She flinched, her heart leaping into her throat. It was a young nurse, holding a clipboard and scanning the room. Sarah hesitated, then slowly raised her hand. As the nurse approached, Sarah forced herself to take a steadying breath. "Right this way," the nurse said, her voice brisk but kind. Sarah followed her through a set of double doors into a triage area. The nurse began asking routine questions, noting down her answers on the clipboard. Then Sarah saw him. Across the room, near a supply cabinet, stood Mark, He was wearing scrubs, a name tag identifying him as Mark, emergency medical technician. Her breath hitched. Her vision swam. It couldn't be him. But it was the same cruel eyes, the same sardonic smile, the same subtly menacing posture. He was looking directly at her, a flicker of recognition, and something else, something predatory, in his gaze. The clipboard slipped from the nurse's grasp, clattering to the floor. Sarah barely registered the sound. All the blood drained from her face. The room spun. Her carefully constructed facade of composure shattered. She was trapped. Utterly, irrevocably trapped. He was here, he was working here, and he knew she was hurt. The sight of Mark triggered a cascade of memories, each one a sharp, painful shard. It hadn't always been like this. She remembered the early days, the whirlwind romance that he was charming, attentive, showering her with compliments and grand gestures. He seemed genuinely interested in her dreams, her passions. He'd started subtly, a controlling comment here, a jealous outburst of It first. She dismissed it as him being protective, caring. But the comments became more frequent, more pointed. He began isolating her from her friends, telling her they were bad influences, that they didn't understand their relationship. Then came the criticisms, her clothes, her career, her opinions. He chipped away at her self-esteem, making her doubt her own judgment. She started walking on eggshells, afraid to say or do anything that might upset him. The first time he hit her, she was stunned. He immediately apologized, sobbing and begging for forgiveness, claiming he'd lost control, that it would never happen again. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But the apologies became less frequent, the violence more severe. He convinced her it was her fault, that she provoked him, that she deserved it. Now, seeing him in that sterile environment, the memories crashed over her like a tidal wave. She was drowning in the past, paralyzed by fear in the present. The nurse who had been leading Sarah to triage was now looking at her with concern. "Are you all right, Miss Miller? You've gone quite pale." Sarah forced a weak smile. "Just a little lightheaded," she mumbled, her eyes darting nervously towards Mark. He was still watching her, his expression unreadable. He hadn't moved. Her mind raced. She had to get out of here. But how? If she simply turned and ran, he would know that he would follow her. He would make things even worse. She needed a plan, a way to escape without alerting him. She scanned the room, desperately searching for an ally, someone who might sense her distress. But everyone was preoccupied attending to patients, filling out paperwork, lost in their own worlds. She was alone. Taking a shaky breath, she decided to play along, at least for now. She needed to buy herself some time to assess the situation, to figure out her next move. She focused on the nurse, trying to appear calm and cooperative. "Perhaps I should just sit down for a moment," Sarah suggested, her voice trembling slightly. "I think the waiting room, it was a bit much." She hoped the nurse would attribute her distress to the general chaos of the ER, not to the monster lurking across the room. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she knew that might be the most dangerous thing she could do. The nurse, seemingly convinced by Sarah's explanation, led her to a nearby chair. "Just take a seat here, Miss Miller, and I'll be right back with some water." As soon as the nurse was out of earshot, Sarah began to formulate a plan. Simply leaving was still an option, albeit a risky one, that if she could slip out unnoticed, she could call Emily, go to the police. But the thought of Mark tracking her down, of the inevitable confrontation, sent a shiver down her spine. Perhaps she could try to subtly alert another staff member. But how could she explain her situation without explicitly accusing Mark, without risking his immediate retaliation? She needed a code, a signal, something that would convey the danger without revealing the source. She considered faking a different injury, something unrelated to the abuse, something that would require a different doctor or nurse to examine her. Maybe she could complain of chest pains or a sudden allergic reaction. IT was a long shot, but it was better than nothing. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an opportunity. The doctor was examining a patient in a nearby cubicle. His back to her, a different nurse was taking vital signs at another station. The clock was ticking. She had to act fast. But one wrong move could have devastating consequences. Taking a deep breath, Sarah clutched her chest and let out a small gasp. She hoped it sounded convincing. She needed someone to notice, to pay attention. She repeated the gasp, but a little louder this time, and leaned forward in her chair, feigning discomfort. A nearby nurse, a woman with kind eyes and a weary smile, glanced over. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked, approaching Sarah cautiously. I don't know," Sarah stammered, trying to appear distressed. I think I'm having chest pains, and I feel dizzy." The nurse frowned, placing a hand on Sarah's arm. "Chest pains? That's concerning. Have you had any heart problems before?" Sarah shook her head. "No, nothing like this. It just started suddenly." She risked a quick glance at Mark. He was still across the room, but he seemed to be moving closer. "All right, let's get you checked out," the nurse said, her voice firm but reassuring. "I'm going to take you to a different area where we can monitor your heart." As the nurse began to lead her away, Sarah added, almost as an afterthought, "It's strange, though I also feel like I'm not safe here." She hoped the coded message would register, that the nurse would understand the unspoken plea in her eyes. Before the nurse could lead Sarah away, Mark intercepted them. "Everything all right here, Nurse Johnson?" he asked, his voice smooth and deceptively concerned. Nurse Johnson paused, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "This young woman is experiencing chest pains. Mark, I'm just going to take her to cardiac monitoring." Mark turned his attention to Sarah, his gaze piercing. "Sarah, what's wrong? You didn't mention anything about chest pains." His words were laced with a subtle accusation, a veiled threat. Sarah forced herself to meet his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "It just came on suddenly," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe I can help," Mark offered, stepping closer. "I'm trained in basic life support. Let me take a look at you." He reached out to touch her arm, but Sarah flinched away. "No, thank you," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I'm fine. Nurse Johnson is taking care of me." Mark's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Don't be silly, Sarah. We're a team here. I just want to make sure you're okay." He was playing the concerned caregiver, but beneath the surface, Sarah could sense the anger simmering. He was losing control, and that made him even more dangerous. The air crackled with tension, the seemingly innocuous exchange masking a power struggle with terrifying stakes. Dr. Ramirez, a seasoned ER physician with years of experience reading between the lines of human behavior, had been observing the interaction from across the room, that he noticed the forced cheerfulness in Mark's voice, the way his eyes lingered on Sarah, the subtle tension radiating from her body. Something wasn't right. He had seen countless cases of domestic abuse come through the ER doors, and he knew the signs. The averted gaze, the hesitant answers, the palpable fear. He couldn't be sure, but his instincts were screaming at him. He watched as Sarah flinched when Mark reached for her. As she clung to Nurse Johnson's arm, he saw the unspoken plea in her eyes when she said she didn't feel safe. It was a subtle exchange, easily missed, but Dr. Ramirez had seen it all before. He approached the group, his expression neutral, but his senses on high alert. "Nurse Johnson, do you need any assistance?" he asked, his voice calm and authoritative. Nurse Johnson, clearly relieved by his presence, replied, "Dr. Ramirez, this patient is experiencing chest pains. I was just about to take her to cardiac monitoring." Dr. Ramirez nodded, his gaze sweeping over Sarah, taking in her pale complexion and the faint tremor in her hands. He then turned his attention to Mark, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Mark, I believe I saw you were assigned to assist with the ambulance arrival. Shouldn't you be heading there?" He wanted to observe them separately, to gauge their individual reactions. Mark reluctantly headed towards the ambulance bay. Dr. Ramirez subtly steered Sarah towards a private examination room. "Let's get you settled here, Miss Miller," he said gently. "We'll run some tests and see what's going on." Once they were alone, he turned to Sarah, his expression serious. "Miss Miller, I'm a doctor, and I'm here to help you. But I also have a responsibility to ensure the safety of everyone in this hospital. There's something you're not telling me." Sarah hesitated, tears welling up in her eyes. She looked at Dr. Ramirez, searching for any sign of judgment or disbelief. but all she saw was compassion. Meanwhile, Dr. Ramirez tasked Nurse Johnson with discreetly checking Mark's personnel file. He wanted to know his background, his employment history, any red flags that might explain his behavior. He also instructed her to observe Mark's interactions with other patients, to see if he displayed any signs of aggression or inappropriate behavior. He knew he was walking a fine line. He couldn't accuse Mark without proof, but he couldn't ignore his gut feeling. He had to proceed carefully, gathering information and building a case, all while ensuring Sarah's safety. The ER was a chaotic place, but Dr. Ramirez was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. In the examination room, Sarah, hesitant at first, began to recount the events of the past few months to Dr. Ramirez. The tears flowed freely as she described Mark's escalating control, his verbal abuse, and finally, the physical violence that had led her to the ER. Meanwhile, Nurse Johnson's investigation was yielding unsettling results that Mark's employment history was spotty, with unexplained gaps and vague references. She contacted his previous employer, a different hospital across town, and discovered that he'd been quietly let go after allegations of inappropriate conduct with a female patient. The details were vague, but the implication was clear. She also observed Mark interacting with other patients in the ER. He was overly solicitous with some, dismissive with others. She noticed a young woman with a sprained ankle visibly tense up when he approached her, averting her gaze and refusing his offer of assistance. That it was a subtle reaction, but Nurse Johnson recognized the signs of fear. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Mark wasn't just a concerned colleague. He was a predator, and Sarah was his prey. Dr. Ramirez and Nurse Johnson now knew they had to act quickly to protect her and potentially others from his abuse. Mark, having finished his brief assignment at the ambulance bay, returned to the main ER area. He noticed Nurse Johnson surreptitiously glancing at him, her expression unreadable. He also saw Dr. Ramirez disappearing into an examination room with Sarah today. Cold dread washed over him. He knew something was wrong. He could feel it in the air. In the way people were avoiding his gaze, he suspected they were talking about him, questioning him. He had to regain control, and fast he approached the examination room, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear muffled voices inside. He pressed his ear against the door, straining to make out the words. "He hit me," he heard Sarah say, her voice choked with emotion. Panic surged through him. He couldn't let her tell them everything. He had to stop her. He tried the door, but it was locked. He pounded on the door, feigning concern. "Sarah, are you all right? I heard you crying." Yes, everything okay?" He needed to get to her, to isolate her, to discredit her claims before she could ruin his life. He needed to remind her of the power he still held over her. The game had changed, and he was playing for keeps. Dr. Ramirez, hearing the commotion outside, quickly unlocked the door and stepped out, blocking Mark's path. "Mark, what's going on?" he asked, his voice firm and authoritative. Mark feigned innocence. "I just heard Sarah crying. I was worried about her." "She's under my care," Dr. Ramirez replied, his gaze unwavering. "And I assure you, she's perfectly safe." "But," Mark began, his voice laced with desperation. "I think it's best if you give us some space, Mark," Dr. Ramirez interrupted, his hand subtly guiding him away from the door. "I need to examine my patient in private." Mark's eyes narrowed, his gaze shifting from Dr. Ramirez to Sarah, who was watching the scene unfold with a mixture of fear and relief. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice low and menacing. "Perhaps you should take a break, Mark," Nurse Johnson said, approaching them cautiously. "You seem a little agitated." She had already discreetly alerted security, and they were on their way. The tension in the air was palpable. It was a subtle power struggle, a battle of wills between Dr. Ramirez and Nurse Johnson, who were determined to protect Sarah, and Mark, who was desperate to maintain control. The confrontation had begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. Mark continued to argue with Dr. Ramirez. Two security guards arrived, their presence immediately shifting the dynamic. Nurse Johnson discreetly informed them of the situation, relaying her suspicions and the information she had gathered about Mark's past. The security guard approached Mark, their expressions neutral, but their movements deliberate. "Sir, we need you to come with us," one of them said, his voice calm but firm. "We have some questions for you." Mark's face paled. He knew the game was up. He tried to protest, to argue his innocence. But his words rang hollow. The security guards were unmoved. While they escorted Mark to a private office, Dr. Ramirez contacted the hospital administration and requested a thorough background check. The results were even more damning than they had anticipated. In addition to the previous allegations of inappropriate conduct, they discovered a pattern of complaints against Mark from former partners, detailing similar instances of controlling behavior, verbal abuse, and even physical violence. There were also records of disciplinary actions from previous employers, all carefully concealed but now brought to light. The evidence was overwhelming. Mark wasn't just a troubled employee. He was a danger to those around him. The hospital had unknowingly hired a predator, and they had to take immediate action to protect their patients and staff. With Mark in custody and the evidence mounting against him, Sarah finally felt a sense of relief wash over her. The fear that had gripped her for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a fragile hope that Dr. Ramirez ensured that she received immediate medical attention. Her injuries were carefully examined and treated, and she was provided with pain medication and a quiet, safe space to recover. Beyond the physical care, Dr. Ramirez and Nurse Johnson also offered her emotional support, validating her experience and assuring her that she was not to blame for what had happened. They connected her with a social worker who specialized in domestic violence cases, providing her with resources and options for her future. The hospital administration, horrified by what had transpired, immediately terminated Mark's employment and pledged their full cooperation with law enforcement. They also launched an internal investigation to determine how he had been hired in the first place and to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she could breathe again. She was safe, she was believed, and she was surrounded by people who cared about her. The nightmare was finally over. The social worker explained the legal options available to Sarah, outlining the process of pressing charges against Mark and the potential consequences he could face. That IT was a daunting prospect, filled with uncertainty and the potential for further trauma. Sarah wrestled with the decision that on one hand, she longed to put the past behind her, to move on with her life and forget that Mark ever existed. The thought of reliving the abuse in court, of facing him again, filled her with dread. But on the other hand, she knew that Mark was a danger to others. His history of abuse and misconduct proved that he was likely to repeat his behavior, to inflict the same pain and suffering on another innocent person. She thought about the young woman with the sprained ankle, the one who had flinched away from Mark in fear. She thought about all the other potential victims, the ones who hadn't yet crossed his path. That IT was a difficult decision, but ultimately, Sarah knew what she had to do. She couldn't stand by and let Mark continue to harm others. She had to use her voice to stand up for herself and for all the other women who had been silenced by abuse. With newfound resolve, she decided to press charges. The road to recovery was long and arduous, but Sarah was determined to heal. She attended regular therapy sessions, working through the trauma she had endured and learning healthy coping mechanisms. She reconnected with her friends, the ones Mark had tried to isolate her from. They rallied around her, offering unwavering support and reminding her of her strength and resilience. She joined a support group for survivors of domestic violence, finding solace and understanding in the shared experiences of others. She realized that she wasn't alone, that many women had gone through similar ordeals and emerged stronger on the other side. She also focused on her physical well-being, taking up yoga and meditation to calm her mind and body. She rediscovered her passions, the hobbies and interests that Mark had tried to suppress. Slowly but surely, Sarah began to rebuild her life. She found a new apartment, a safe haven where she could feel at peace. She pursued her career goals, determined to achieve her dreams. She learned to trust her instincts again, to set boundaries, and to value herself. She realized that she was worthy of love and respect, and that she deserved to be happy. Her journey was far from over, but she was finally on the right path, moving towards healing and empowerment. Sarah's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can prevail. It highlights the importance of speaking out against abuse, of breaking the cycle of silence that allows it to thrive. That if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please know that you are not alone. There are resources available to help you, to support you, and to guide you towards safety and healing. Remember that seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. It takes courage to break free from abuse, to reclaim your life and your voice. You are worthy of love, respect, and happiness. Reach out to a trusted friend, family member, or professional. Contact a local domestic violence organization or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-SAFE 7233. You can also find valuable information and resources online. Don't let shame or fear keep you silent. Your voice matters, your story matters, and your life matters. Together, we can create a world where everyone feels safe, respected, and empowered to live free from abuse. Sarah's journey is a beacon of hope, proving that healing is possible and that a brighter future awaits.